Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here. This is going to be my patch 9.2 Demonology Warlock DPS guide. In it, we're going to be covering talents, tier sets, legendaries, 0-piece, 2-piece, 4-piece, covenants, soulbinds, conduits, rotation, single target AOE, basically anything that you can think of for Demonology Warlock heading into patch 9.2 and Sepulchre. Now, if there are any weak wards, profiles, or add-ons to see here you'd like to grab, they are indeed all available to you guys for free on my Twitch. If you want to swing by, hang out, grab them, answer any questions anytime, feel free to do so. Before we get into the video, I also want to give one massive shout out to my patrons. Thank you guys a million times for all support. Really appreciate it. If you're interested in supporting, there should be a link somewhere up here as well as down in the video description below. So with that being said, let's get into it, starting off with Demonology's new tier set. So getting into the Demonology tier sets, the 2-piece says Called Dreadstalkers has a 100% chance to summon an additional Dreadstalker. Now currently in 9.1 and going into 9.2, until you obtain your 2-piece, your Call Dreadstalkers summons 2 Dreadstalkers. When you get your 2-piece, it summons 3. Now 3 means 3 demonic core charges instead of 2, because whenever they expire, each Dreadstalker gives you 1 charge of demonic core. So number 1, more damage off the bat from your Dreadstalkers. Number 2, more shard gen from more demonic core stacks. It's very, very strong, and it also adds more synergy to Carnivore Stalkers, the Conduit, from the Shadows of Talent, Dreadlash, and just more actual power behind the big dogs build of Demonology. Now the 4-piece says your Hand of Gul'dan has a 15% chance per soul shard spent to summon a malicious imp. When slain, malicious imps will either deal X fire damage, which is actually Shadow Flame damage, to all nearby enemies of your implosion, or deal it to your current target. So basically, if you implode that malicious imp, it does count towards the implosion damage, and it does like its own little explosion on the target that will hit surrounding targets, sort of how like implosion works. It's called Spite. But Spite actually deals a pretty substantial amount of damage in sustained AoE. It's a pretty impressive 4-piece in AoE-based settings. And if it expires in single target, meaning the malicious imp casts all of its spell firebolts, it casts an ability called Doom Bolt when it dies, which is also Shadow Flame damage, and it counts towards from the Shadow's damage increase, and has a lot of just synergies with the spec as a whole. More malicious imps, more Dreadstalkers means more demonic consumption value. The 2-piece and 4-piece for Demonology just sort of double down on what the spec's already good at doing. It's a really solid overall tier set, and I'm pretty happy with it heading into 9.2. So when looking at Demonology's single target talents heading into patch 9.2 and Sepulchre, the builds you play and talents you play will change based on how many pieces of tier you have. 0-piece, 2-piece, and 4-piece, and I'll try to highlight that here, so keep it in mind. In the 15 row, Demonic Strength is going to be the best option you have with 0 pieces of tier. It's a 1-minute cooldown that makes your Felguards spin, do a lot of damage, good in single target, good in AoE. When you obtain your 2-piece tier, which gives you a 3rd Dreadstalker, Dreadlash will pull ahead of Demonic Strength in single target. A 3rd Dreadstalker, more Dreadbite damage. Makes sense. 25 row, Demonic Calling is going to be the de facto option across the board in every setting, making your Dreadstalker's instant cast cost 2 less shards. It's just very good, even when it comes to, sort of RNG with building Tyrants. It's just strong across the board, and in the end, can provide a little bit of extra mobility, if need be as well. 30 row, similar to other specs, Dark Pact I think is the best option here. It's a very, very large survivability cooldown on a 1-minute CD. It's just really, really strong. The amount of, the shield size it gives is excessive. You can play Burning Rush if you need the mobility on a certain fight, but over the course of SOD, really you can play Dark Pact in every fight and just get around movement-based mechanics with Wind Rush totems and roars and things like that. Dark Pact is very, very strong, especially when paired with Unending Resolve or other major cooldown. Now the other row that changes here based on 2-piece, 35 row. So the de facto best option with 0 pieces of tier or 2 pieces of tier will be Summon Vile Fiend. However, when you obtain your 4-piece tier, meaning your Malicious Imp part of the tier, which when they expire, they do Shadow Flame damage from the shadows, is basically neck and neck with Vile Fiend and pulls ahead in certain settings. Because from the shadows, causes your Dreadstalkers, whenever they Dreadbite, it gives them a chance to reapply, to apply a debuff, which makes the target take 20% more damage, more Shadow Flame damage. 4-piece. Shadow Flame damage. Having a 3rd Dreadstalker from the 2-piece, a higher chance to Dreadbite. Carnivore Stalkers gives them a chance to Dreadbite again in combat, because they only initially Dreadbite when they first leap into combat upon being cast. So you can see Demonology has become this one, it's become even more synergistic than it has been in the past. And From the Shadows does indeed basically sim even, if not pull ahead a tiny bit in single target when you obtain your 4-piece. Also making the spec much more forgiving to play when you're playing Demonic Consumption in certain settings, more mobility. If you mess up a Tyrant setup and your Vile Fiend expires, well, you're not playing Vile Fiend anymore, so you're good to go. In the 40 row, the only option here I think in rating realistically is Mortal Coil. 45-second cooldown, 20% heal. The end cap is relevant every once in a while. A good, just solid, strong option across the board. The 45 row stays the same, whether you have 0-piece, 2-piece, or 4-piece. Grimoire Felguard. A strong cooldown, a 2-minute cooldown albeit, but a very strong extra pet to put into your Demonic Consumption based Tyrants, which is pretty much the de facto talent in the 50 row, being Demonic Consumption. Whenever you summon your Tyrant, which is reduced to right around the 1-minute mark when you're playing spoilers ahead, the Wilfred's Legendary, it lines up very well with every other Grimoire Felguard. 2-minute cooldown. Tyrant being 1-minute cooldown. So you have this large Tyrant, smaller Tyrant, large Tyrant, smaller Tyrant cycling that you do. But having that very strong 1-minute single target base profile, it's niche but very important and relevant in Prog, is very strong in one of the strengths of Demonology. Not to mention, Demonic Consumption siphons health from your pets. How do your pets get more health? If you, the Warlock, have more health. Demonology is the one spec in the game that I know of that scales with stamina-based effects. If you have more health, your pets have more health. So your Tyrant siphons more health from your pets to empower himself even further. Not to mention, Demonology scales very well with Power Infusion too. So if you want Power Infusions, Demonology is probably one of the better specs to play. So when it comes to AoE Mythic Plus talents for Demonology in 9.2, the 15 row here, Dreadlash is going to be your best option. It makes your Dreadstalkers AoE their Dread Bite within 8 yards, and also makes them deal 25% more damage via Dread Bite. And your 2-piece gives you a 3rd Dreadstalker, so more Dreadlash value. It's why it's better in single target with 2-piece, and also much better in AoE with your 2-piece. 25 row Demonic Calling is still the best option here by a long shot. 2 less shards in your Dreadstalker's cast, instant cast, very strong. And hey, 2 more shards is 2 more imps, which can mean a faster implosion cycle, whatever, what have you. It's just a strong all-around ability. And for the most part, typically every Dreadstalker cast, you have a Demonic Calling proc based on the amount of Shadow Bolts and Demon Bolts you're casting. The 30 row, you have Dark Pact. You have Burning Rush once again here if you need some kind of mobility. But for the most part, in Mythic Plus, I really don't see a reason to play Burning Rush here. Dark Pact is so strong, a huge shield, 1-minute cooldown. It helps you live through abilities you otherwise wouldn't. It's, I would say, the de facto just default choice when it comes to both Mythic Plus and rating at this point. The 35 row, from the Shadow, is going to be the best option here. Dread Bite causes the target to take 20% additional Shadow Flame damage from you for the next 12 seconds. A lot of synergy with this talent. It was changed, I believe, in early 9.1. What is Shadow Flame damage? Demon Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan impact splash damage, Implosion, spike damage from your 4-piece, Doom Bolt damage from your 4-piece, and your Tyrant's Dreadfire cast. They are all Shadow Flame damage. So if FTS is applied to whatever target you're hitting or targets in AoE, they take 20% more Implosion damage or Demon Fire damage from your Tyrant. It's a very, very strong ability. It was changed in 9.1 to also affect your Tyrant's damage. You can see why it's close in single target with your 4-piece, and much better in AoE with the actual 4-piece. Plus, there's a chance playing the Carnivorous Stalker's Conduit for your dogs, Dreadstalkers, to Dread Bite again, reapplying from the shadows for an even higher uptime. In the 40 row, we have Mortal Coil, Dark Fury. I think Coil, more often than not, is the better choice here. Short cooldown, 20% heal, and the end cap can be relevant at times if you need to like kick a mob or interrupt it or whatever, what have you, and you don't have your actual kick or stun available. If you need a shorter kick CD for whatever, or a stun CD for whatever reason, Dark Fury can be an option, but you really don't see it played very often in a Mythic Plus base setting. The 45 row, we have Grimoire Felguard or Soul Conduit. Now, Grimoire is going to be your better single target based option when it comes to Plus, and also it has a lot of AoE relevancy, because when you summon it, it will Fellstorm, which is very strong on large pulls. Soul Conduit, however, has, well, a bit more RNG, but more shard refunds. And more shard refunds mean more Hand of Gul'dan cast, more imps, which theoretically fuels more implosions. Now, you can go either way here. Soul Conduit, I will say, over the course of PTR testing, has been the better option for me if I'm playing Grim Inquisitors, the legendary in Mythic Plus, and not Wilfred's, the 1-minute cooldown legendary. If you're playing Wilfrids, I've played both. Typically, I opt more for Grimoire Felguard in like tyrannical base settings and Soul Conduit in fortified AoE base settings. But Soul Conduit means more Hand of Gul'dan cast, which we'll get to in a minute here. But, you know, Grim Inquisitor Legendary means more hand cast, larger dog damage amp. It just snowballs in there, making a very, very strong single target and AoE based build. So there's options in both here. In the 50 row, we have Demonic Consumption. It's just the best all-around talent, and it's not really close. Having your Tyrant either a minute cooldown or even a minute and a half, having that just strong damage profile on that short of a cooldown with pet extensions, everything that it brings, and the From the Shadows relevancy, it's just really, really strong. Demonology looks very well positioned in Mythic Plus, heading in the 9.2. So when it comes to legendaries for Demonology Warlock in 9.2, there are some that have gained some ground with your 2-piece and your 4-piece, and then there's Wilfrids, which is just your best de facto all-around legendary ever since, I think, Alpha for Demonology, actually. Every soul shard you spend reduces the cooldown on summon Demonic Tyrant by 0.6 seconds. Your final talent, being Demonic Consumption, it greatly empowers your Demonic Tyrant. Shorter Tyrant cooldowns, more raw damage. Wilfrids has been the best legendary in raiding the entire expansion, and I expect that to continue heading into patch 9.2 and Sepulchre. Now, the other legendary that is worth mentioning here that has gained a lot of ground with the 2-piece is actually Grim Inquisitor's Dreadcalling. Each soul shard spent on Hand of Gul'dan increases the damage of your next call Dreadstalkers by 4%, and this stacks. So the 2-piece gives you a third Dreadstalker with every Dreadstalker set cast. So this legendary stocks have gone up substantially this patch because of that. Now, this does give you the minute and a half baseline Tyrant damage profile and not a minute like Wilfrids does. So there's a bit of a difference there. But when you factor in a second stack target like in Mythic Plus, or even like certain raid fights where you have 2 stacked targets, Grim Inquisitor gains a lot of value when you're playing the Dreadlash from the Shadows build. This legendary I expect to be possibly the best legendary in Mythic Plus, on par with Wilfrids, if not a little bit ahead. Wilfrids brings a bit more of a single target based profile, but still solid AoE. This legendary brings solid single target as well, and a very solid AoE profile to boot. Now, there are a couple more legendaries worth mentioning here. One is Balespider's Burning Core. There is a Necrolord Demonology build that only works when you get double legendaries with this build. It is a very different talent build. It is not as good as Decon from what I've seen in Sims, and in actuality, in raiding and things, I think it's a lot more difficult to pull off as far as like min-maxing is concerned. If that build ends up being worthwhile, I'll make a different video covering it at a certain point, but I think it's too experimental and speculative at this point to consider one of the better builds as far as Demonology is concerned. The final legendary we have here is called Implosive Potential. Now, this is similar to the Explosive Potential Azerite trait from Battle for Azeroth. Implosion grants 1% haste for 12 seconds for each imp imploded in single target. When this damages at least 3 targets, the implosion instead gain 5% haste per imp. So this legendary is very, very powerful in settings where you can pull multiple packs at once, or at least 3 targets. If you can pull trash onto a boss, or if it's a boss with, you know, multiple ads present, like Gorechomp and Theater of Pain, you can get a lot of value out of Implosive Potential. The downside, though, is that single target wise, it's not really worth imploding. I believe like 11 or 12 imps. And at that point, it's for a very, very minor gain. So very, very strong at AoE, not that great in single target. But if you can AoE on a single target mob, in a sense funnel damage, it's one of the better choices. Very good in certain settings, just very niche settings. So overall, Wilfrids, best bet for raiding. Grim Inquisitors and Wilfrids, I'd say neck and neck as far as Mythic Plus and stacked AoE is concerned. So when it comes to Covenants for Demonology Warlock in 9.2, you have 2 options, and they are Night Fae and Necrolord. Now, if you opt to go the Night Fae route, your legendary is called Decaying Soul Satchel, and says each target hit by your soul route, which is a max of 4 targets, by the way, increases your haste and crit strike chance by 5% for 8 seconds. Now, the crit effect here is additive. However, the haste is multiplicative, which means if I hit, 1 target, it's 5, 2, 10, 3, 15, and 4 being 20. But if you have a Bloodlust effect, or a Heroism, or a Power Infusion, or some other haste-based effect with this, it's a multiplicative kind of haste amp, which things can get pretty crazy factoring in that Demonology scales a crazy amount already with power infusion and haste based effects, because more haste, more pets into your Tyrant, more demonic consumption value. It can be very, very strong in 2+ target based settings, not even terrible when it comes to pure single target. Now, if you opt to go the Necrolord route, your legendary is called Shard of Annihilation. It says Decimating Bolt, which is Necrolord's baseline ability similar to Soul Rot, also increases the critical strike chance by 100% of Demon Bolt, and the crit strike damage by 50% for Demon Bolt. Now, Shard of Annihilation is a 45-second cooldown. Soul Rot for Night Fae is 1 minute. So if you are playing the Wilfred's 1-minute legendary build as Necrolord, even though Decimating Bolt is 45 seconds, you will hold that Decimating Bolt to the 1-minute mark to pair it with every Tyrant, thanks to Plague Deviser Merilith, the Soulbind, and the ability he has called Kevin's Oozling. However, so when it comes to raw sims here, Night Fae is a tiny bit ahead of Necrolord playing the same demonic consumption build. Necrolord has more of a single target damage profile. Night Fae has a more, it's single target based, but factoring in 2 targets, 3 targets, 4 targets in a funnel based setting with a priority mob or a boss in there. Night Fae can get some insane haste, crit, and just damage amps in general, which is why you see Night Fae typically played as the de facto Covenant of choice when it comes to Mythic Plus, and basically all raid settings playing the decon build of Demonology. And hey, in the end, Soul Shape's not too bad either. I did also want to mention briefly that Necrolord does potentially have has an interesting build, being the Demon Bolt Bale Spider's Burning Core build, which we just sort of talked about a minute ago here, with Shard Annihilation and insane Demon Bolt damage modifier stacking, with a completely different build of Demonology as well, not playing demonic consumption. That build is pretty early in development, a bit experimental, and not really one that's been totally fleshed out and played in a raid-based setting. Now, on top of the fact that also needs double legendaries to be even relevant in the first place, which is not a thing, week 1, 2, 3 of the raid, I opted to omit that build from the video. If it does indeed become a relevant build, I will make a video on it in the future, but at this point, Decon is, I believe, something a bit better. I think Decon is a much more applicable build when it comes to raid-based settings, and certainly Mythic Plus-based settings. So if you've chosen Night Fae as your Covenant of choice in 9.2, there are 2 Soulbinds that are realistic options for Demonology heading into Sepulchre and Mythic Plus. However, one is, I would say, the better option, and that is Dreamweaver. Dreamweaver is just a strong Soulbind across the board. Her Feel the Blossoms ability, which gives you a 15% haste amp whenever you stand in it for 12 seconds after casting your Soul Rot, is very strong for Demonology. You typically cast this Feel the Blossoms after your Tyrant, which gives your Tyrant and pets that are active more haste, more cast, more demon fire damage, more decon scaling value. Now, if you factor in, once again, Decaying Soul Satchel, the Night Fae legendary, that Feel the Blossoms haste amp is multiplicative with Decaying Soul Satchel, so even more haste. Her final ability is called Dream Delver, which is essentially a flat 3% damage increase on whatever target you're hitting, as long as you are hitting it over a period of time greater than 3 to 4 seconds. So both her abilities here are just solid, obviously also factoring in 3 potency conduits. Nia is the other Soulbind option you have as Demonology. Now, Dreamweaver does sim better in both single target and AoE. The haste is very strong. However, Nia is sort of the training wheel Soulbind in a sense. It also has certain points of relevancy when it comes to progression. Most of her strength lies in her first ability, which is called Grove Invigoration. Healing or dealing damage has a chance to grant you a stack of redirected anima. Redirected anima increases your maximum health by 1%. Keep in mind, Demonology scales damage-wise with stamina-based effects. It also increases your mastery by a certain amount for 30 seconds, being half a minute, and stacks overlap. Now, casting Soul Rot grants you 8 stacks of redirected anima, so an 8% stamina increase and a mastery increase. Now, like we mentioned a little bit ago, Demonology scales with stamina-based effects. You have more stamina, so your pets have more stamina. So when you're playing Demonic Consumption, the talent, your Tyrant siphons more health from your pets because you, the player, have more health. It is the one spec in the game that scales with stamina-based effects, which is why you see at times in heavy progression-based settings, Demonology Warlocks having rallying cries and other stamina-based external effects around their actual Tyrant cooldowns. Now, if you play Nia, this effect lasts half a minute. You don't need half a minute to set up your Tyrant, so there's more leeway there. And you'll cast your Soul Rot before your actual Tyrant setup, which gives you a bit of wiggle room if you have to move out a mechanic or start over again. You have time to sort of juggle extra pets here and there. Dreamweaver is much less forgiving, having that Field of Blossoms haste amp down, stand in it to get the haste amp. But she does indeed sim better. So in the end, the option is up to you. Dreamweaver does indeed sim better in both Mythic Plus and single target. Now, if you've chosen to play Necrolord as your covenant of choice for Demonology in 9.2, and once again, this is referencing the Demonic Consumption build of Necrolord Demonology, not the Demon Bolt build. If that build becomes relevant in PvE later on down the line, I will make a video on that. This is the Demonic Consumption build. If you're playing that version with Necrolord, Plague Divisor Merileth is going to be the Soulbind you want to play, and that is mainly due to his final ability being Kevin's Oozling. It says Decimating Bolt, which is a 45-second cooldown, summons Kevin's Oozling to fight alongside you for 15 seconds. His attacks cause your enemies to take 6% additional damage from you, which means you want to pair this ability with your Tyrant. Now, if you're playing Wilfred's, which gives you that 1-minute Tyrant damage profile, even though Decimating Bolt is 45 seconds, you will hold it to the 1-minute mark, roughly, basically every single Tyrant cast. You'll cast your Tyrant after you set it up, and then cast Decimating Bolt quickly after that for the 6% Kevin's Oozling damage amp, because it also affects Tyrant's Demon Fire damage, other, damage effects during that window. If you decide to play a 1.5-minute build of Demonology without Wilfred's, say playing Grim Inquisitors or Implosion Legendary or whatever you're playing, you will cast Decimating Bolt on cooldown. It is a 45-second CD, which means you can cast it with your Tyrant on pull, cast it on cooldown 45 seconds later, and then 45 seconds after that, cast it again with your second Tyrant, and it lines up very well. Either way, Decimating Bolt with Plague Divisor Merileth, you hold it for your Tyrant basically every time as Necrolord Demonology. So looking at conduits for Demonology Warlock in patch 9.2, there are a couple that you basically take, set, and forget. The first one is called Born of Blood. It says Hand of Gul'dan has an X% chance to generate a charge of Demonic Core. Now, Demonic Core is essentially an instant cast Demon Bolt, and keep in mind, whenever your Dreadstalkers expire, they also grant 1 Demonic Core charge per Dreadstalker. So in 9.2, with your 2-piece, you get 3 whenever they expire, which means between that and this conduit, you're going to be swimming in Demonic Core or instant cast Demon Bolt procs in 9.2. Now, the second conduit here that you want to take is Tyrant Soul. It says after your Tyrant expires, you gain a stack of Demonic Core, and increase the damage of your demons that are active by X% for 15 seconds. So this conduit gains a bit more value when playing Wilfred's, because minute Tyrant versus 1.5 not playing Wilfred's, but it's also strong across the board. The actual damage amp from your pets when your Tyrant expires, just good all-around conduit. Now, the other two here are Carnivorous Stalkers and Tyrant Soul. Carnivorous Stalker says your Dreadstalker's attacks have an X% chance to trigger an additional Dread Bite. This conduit gains a lot of ground in 9.2 due to the 2-piece, giving you a third dog, a third Dreadstalker. Third Dreadstalker means higher from the shadows uptime, because there's a higher chance to Dread Bite again, because there's 3 Dreadstalkers versus 2, which means more Dreadlash damage, higher FTS uptime, more Shadow Flame damage being dealt to packs, essentially because of higher uptime on the actual debuff in both single target and in AoE. When you acquire your 2-piece tier set, Carnivorous Stalkers becomes the best third potency conduit you can play in basically every setting, which leaves out Fel Commando. Now, this is not a bad conduit by any means. We played this more in single target in 9.1, but 9.2 times change. Your Felguard deals X% more damage and takes X% less damage. So this does indeed affect Demonic Strength, the talent, if you're playing it before you get your 2-piece or your 4-piece or things like that. But for the most part, the synergy behind Carnivorous Stalkers and the 2-piece giving you a third Dreadstalker just makes it so that Born of Blood, first conduit, Tyrant Soul number 2, and Carnivorous Stalkers number 3 when you acquire your 2-piece. Until you acquire 2-piece, Carnivorous does indeed sim a little better in pure single target. Obviously much better in AoE playing the FTS Dreadlash build regardless, but I wouldn't fault somebody for playing Fel Commando if you're on a fight where you want a bit of that large Demonic Strength on-demand burst profile every minute or so, because it will indeed increase damage there as well. So getting into the rotation section of the guide here, I want to say before we get into all the Soulbinds and different openers here that Demonology's opener and just the natural state of Demonology is RNG. At times you'll get Demonic Core stacks, which are instant cast Demon Bolts in your opener. At times you won't. At times you'll get instant cast Dog Cast, Dreadstalkers, Demonic Calling procs. At times you won't. At times those will give more shards in your opener. At times you won't have as many shards. That's just how Demonology works. So doing multiple openers on a dummy, learning how Demonology functions with procs, without procs, and using them accordingly is the best. It's what you want to do to get used to Demonology's opener. Now, to a similar extent, depending on certain things, there are times you can squeeze in an extra Shadow Bolt in your final hand of Gul'dan cast. At times you won't be able to, just based on procs, on Demonic Core procs, on Demonic Calling procs. So really getting used to the opener and seeing what your own character can do on a min-max kind of level based on haste levels and other things is what is recommended when looking at every kind of opener for Demonology. So once again, getting into the Nia Demonology opener, and just to clarify one more time, we're not going to be talking about Demonic Core procs, Demonic Calling procs here. This is going to be the bare bones, no procs kind of opener. If you get those procs, just react to them accordingly based on the amount of shards you have and things like that. So you want to precast a Demon Bolt with about 4 seconds before the boss is pulled, follow them by a Soul Rot if you're playing Nia. Once again, if you're not playing Nia, meaning you're playing Dreamweaver as Night Fae, you'll cast your Soul Rot later, but we'll get to that in a minute. Your third ability should be Grimoire Felguard, followed by Summon Vile Fiend. At this point, you'll be at 3 shards. You want to cast 2 Shadow Bolts back to 5 shards, and then cast your called Dreadstalkers. Now, once again, if you get a Demonic Calling proc, it'll be instant cast and cost no shards. But if you don't get that proc, they will cost 2 shards, which will put you back to 3. At this point, cast your Soul Eating Ruby Trinket if you have it equipped, and then you want to build back to 5 shards by casting 2 Shadow Bolts. Then you'll cast Hand of Gul'dan, putting you to 2 shards. Shadow Bolt back to 3, Hand of Gul'dan again, then Trinkets, Racials, Intellect Pots, whatever, what have you, summon Demonic Tyrant. Now, it's also very important after the Tyrant to cast a Hand of Gul'dan immediately after that, because your Tyrant will give you 5 shards when you summon him. After that, you can then cast your Demonic Strength and go from there following the normal builder-spender kind of rotation that Demonology has. Cast Dreadstalkers on cooldown, cast Hand of Gul'dans at 3 shards, and basically go from there. Now, if you're playing Wilfrids, which you should be in a raiding kind of setting, you will have a minute Tyrant. So typically right around playing it on the safe side, you'll start setting up your Tyrant being, you know, your Vile Fiend cast into your Dreadstalkers, into your Imps once again, with about roughly 16-ish seconds remaining on your Summon Demonic Tyrant cooldown, which, you know, thinking about the actual Wilfrid's cooldown reductions you'll get during the cast sequencing, should give you your Tyrant off cooldown basically on the last Hand of Gul'dan cast, and you'll cast the Soul Rot at about the same point before the Vile Fiend and go from there. And it's these large 1-minute cycles of damage, Tyrant, Hand of Gul'dan, Demonic Strength, back and forth. And that's basically the gist of what you do for Demonology playing Nia. Every other Tyrant with Wilfrids will have a Grimoire Felguard in it, but every single Tyrant will have a Vile Fiend. You'll hold the Vile Fiend for about 15-ish seconds. It's a 45-second cooldown, but you want to have it every minute in every Demonic Tyrant. Now, if you opt to play Dreamweaver, which is going to be the superior Soulbind for Night Fae, the opener is actually pretty similar, just you move your Soul Rot timing, and it's very important to move that Soul Rot timing. So you'll precast Demon Bolt with about 4 seconds again before the boss is pulled. You'll forego the Soul Rot cast after that. So you'll go Demon Bolt right into Grimoire Felguard, into Vile Fiend, and then once again, 2 Shadow Bolts back to 5 shards, cast your Dreadstalkers, whether they're instant or not, depending on procs and things like that, cast your Ruby, build back to 5 shards with 2 Shadow Bolts, then cast Hand of Gul'dan, Shadow Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan, then any kind of trinket you haven't popped, Racials, Intellect Potions, whatever, summon Demonic Tyrant. Now, right after that Tyrant, you want to then cast your Soul Rot and stand in the Field of Blossoms effect. Right after the Soul Rot, you want to cast Hand of Gul'dan, and then cast your Demonic Strength. And after that, it's basically the same thing as Nia. You have these 1-minute Tyrants playing Wilfrid, so you'll have, you know, every Tyrant with a Vile Fiend in it, every other one will have a Grimoire Felguard in it, and you'll want to hold your Soul Rot for basically the exact same timing, pretty much every single time. Tyrant into Soul Rot, into Hand of Gul'dan, into Demonic Strength. And it just makes this 1-minute cycle of Tyrants, it's basically what makes Demonology as strong as it is in these single target settings, having this strong 1-minute niche damage profile. And that Soul Rot haste amp applies to your Tyrant, which gives more Tyrant cast, more pet cast. Dreamweaver is the better option when it comes to single target, but Nia has more of a training wheels kind of effect, depending what you want to do Soulbind wise. So if you're playing Necrolord Demonology in 9.2 with the Plague Divisor Merilith Soulbind, the opener you want to follow is precasting a Demon Bolt with about 4 seconds before the boss is pulled, followed by a Grimoire Felguard, summon Vile Fiend. That'll put you at 3 shards, which you'll build back to by 2 Shadow Bolts, and then at that point, you'll cast Called Dreadstalkers, whether you have a Demonic Calling proc or not. At that point, pop your Soul Letting Ruby if you have it equipped, and then based on a Demonic Calling proc or not, you'll either build back to 5 shards with Shadow Bolts, and then cast Hand of Gul'dan, Shadow Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan, pop Trinkets, Rachel's Intellect Potions, and then summon Demonic Tyrant. If you don't get a Calling proc or do have one vice versa, that might allow you to squeeze in a couple more Imps, a couple more Shadow Bolt cast. That will also depend on your haste levels and things like that. It'll vary between everyone's character, and also Demonic Calling procs and Demonic Core procs. So once again, it's worth just experimenting and messing with Demonology's Opener multiple times on a dummy. After casting Demonic Tyrant, the first spell you want to cast is going to be Decimating Bolt. After that, Hand of Gul'dan, and then Demonic Strength. The big thing here, and the reason why you push back Decimating Bolt after the Tyrant, is because Decimating Bolt applies Kevin's Oozling debuff, which is a 6% damage increase, or damage taken increase, on the target you're hitting. Now, Decimating Bolt is a 45-second cooldown, but you're still going to hold that for every Tyrant, which is a minute cooldown, while playing the Wilfred's Demonic Consumption build of Demonology as Necrolord. And outside of that, it's basically build or spender. 3 shards, Hand of Gul'dan cast Called Dreadstalkers on cooldown, and every minute you'll have a Tyrant. Every other Tyrant will have a Grimoire Felguard in it. Every Tyrant will have a Vile Fiend in it. And similar to Night Fae setup, typically about the 16-ish second mark remaining on your cooldown of Demonic Tyrant, you start casting your Vile Fiend, you're building the 5 shards, your Dreadstalkers, your Imps, to basically give you a Demonic Tyrant cast right when it comes off CD from Wilfred's Legendary. Once again, Demon Bolt after that, Hand of Gul'dan, Demonic Strength, rinse and repeat. It's pretty similar, and outside of like the abilities being different, Decimating Bolt versus Soul Rod, it's basically the same. Just how Dreamweaver is for Night Fae. So I did want to briefly cover the Dreadlash from the Shadows Tyrant setups and openers, because it's very similar to what you do with, playing Grimoire and with playing Vile Fiend. You just mostly forego those talents if need be. Now, Soul Rot timings for Nia, Dreamweaver, Decimating Bolt timings for Necrolord, they don't change. Same cast times as we just talked about previously. So let's say you're playing from the Shadows Dreadlash Grimoire Felguard. Your opener will be precast Demon Bolt, Soul Rot timings, whatever, depending on what you're playing there. Grimoire Felguard, build the 5 shards, cast Called Dreadstalkers. Now, if you have a Ruby equipped, you can pop your Ruby here, and then typically build the 5 shards, cast a Hand, Shadow Bolt or 2, Hand, maybe Hand again, and then Tyrant based off your haste levels and procs, things like that. And that's like the bigger Tyrant there. And you once again cast Decimating Bolt after the Tyrant if you're playing Necrolord. Dreamweaver Soul Rot there too, and follow the normal sequencing. Now, the in-combat Tyrants, for the most part, the smaller ones, the non-Grimoire based ones, all you're going to have is a Dreadstalker cast and typically 9 to 11 Imps, and that's it, because you're not playing Vile Fiend, you're playing from the Shadows, which gives you more Demon Fire damage from your Tyrant, but no extra Vile Fiend. And once again, Grimoire is a 2-minute cooldown, so you're playing Wilfred's, your big Tyrant, small Tyrant sequencing will be the same as playing, the larger ones, just with only dogs and Imps in the smaller Tyrants. Now, let's talk a bit more about in-combat Tyrant setup and the 11 Imp Tyrants. Now, the amount of pets you put into your Tyrant, basically Imps, in combat will actually increase and vary a bit depending on procs after your initial opening Tyrant, and that's due to Demonic Core procs coming in from Dreadstalkers expiring in combat. Now, the 2-piece, once again, tier set gives you 3 Dreadstalkers. So whenever they expire after getting 2-piece, you'll get 3 Demonic Core procs. Before you get 2-piece, you'll have 2. But regardless, it gives you more room to play with. So the initial opening setup, Soul Rot timing, Decimating Bolt timing, whatever, won't change. If you got a Grimoire, if you got a Vile Fiend, same thing. Basically, everything's the same until after you cast your Called Dreadstalkers. In the normal opener, you go Hand of Gul'dan, Shadow Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan, Tyrant. In combat, normal stuff, if you got a Grimoire, Vile Fiend, throw it, do what you gotta do. Then, after Dreadstalkers, you'll build back to 5 shards, with Shadow Bolt typically. And then when you're at 5, you'll go Hand of Gul'dan, Demon Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan, Demon Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan, and then Tyrant. That gives you a 9 Imp Tyrant, and it's very easy to do in combat with Demonic Core procs. Now, there might be certain builds at certain times, or haste levels, power infusions, whatever, what have you, based on procs, where you can also potentially get 11 Imp Tyrants. This is more or less we've seen without playing Vile Fiend, more of the Dreadlash FTS build, and typically ones where you don't have Grimoire Felguard in them, where it's just like, hey, Dreadstalkers and Imps. So you'll cast your dogs, Dreadstalkers, build back to 5 shards, and then go from 5 shards, Hand of Gul'dan, Demon Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan, Demon Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan, Demon Bolt one more time, and then Hand of Gul'dan one more time. And that 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 2 imps in the final hand is 11. Now, the big thing here is making sure your dogs, Dreadstalkers, don't expire, and your Grimoire at the same time if you popped it. So it's sort of finicky, a lot tougher to do, but regardless, in combat Tyrant setup, the 9 imp one is what you want to strive for every time, and the 11 imp can be possible down the road with 3 demonic core procs and more or less FTS Dreadlash builds in the future. Now, when it comes to Demonology's AoE Mythic Plus, it really just revolves around Implosion. Your Felguard would do some general cleave. Your Dreadstalkers, if playing Dreadlash from the Shadows, would do cleave whenever you cast them, and if you're playing from the Shadows, they have a chance to reapply the FTS debuff in every mob they Dreadbite, which, as long as they're stacked, should be basically the entire pack. But Demonology's AoE mostly involves around Implosion and the Implosion Rotation, which will vary a bit depending on how many stacks of Demonic Core you have, if you have any. So if you have no stacks of Demonic Core, what you want to do is build the 5 shards, cast Hand of Gul'dan, Shadow Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan, and then typically a filler spell like a Shadow Bolt here, which gives time for that second set of imps to spawn and then implode. And that is the 6 imp implosion. If you have 2 demonic core stacks, or technically more, you can build the 5 shards, cast Hand of Gul'dan, Demon Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan, Demon Bolt, and 1 final Hand of Gul'dan, which will spawn the 3rd set, being 9 imps, cast the filler spell in there like a Shadow Bolt, and then you can implode. So that is the 9 imp implosion rotation. Now, obviously, if at all possible, you want to implode while your targets have from the shadows applied to them, the talent, if you're playing that. But for the most part, that is the sequence you'll follow as Demonology and AoE, the 6 imp or 9 imp implosion rotations. Now, if you have a Tyrant out and that Tyrant baseline just extends your imps, you can still follow that implosion rotation in combat during your Tyrant for a much larger implosion. And you see that a good bit of time in Mythic Plus, going from one pack to the next, having 15, 18, 21 imps running around behind you, pulling that pack, casting Dreadstalkers to apply FTS for the overall big dog chomp, FTS debuff, and then implode 20 imps. You see Demo Locks burst 60, 70, 80k, if not higher at that point, saving up that large implosion, moving from one pack to the next. But the implosion rotation is the bread and butter of Demonology's AoE, and it's not too hard to understand once you get the flow of it. Now, when it comes to pets for Demonology, there's only one real option, and that is the Felguard. The Felguard is the Demonology specific pet. It has a few talents, being Demonic Strength and Soul Strike, that only work with the Felguard out, albeit you really don't play Soul Strike in any setting, but Demonic Strength is played in a wide variety of scenarios and will be your best single target option until you acquire your 2-piece. On top of that, the Felguard does indeed have Axe Toss, which is a interrupt and a stun that stuns for 4 seconds on a 30-second cooldown, and Fellstorm, which is a small AoE based damage effect also on a 30-second cooldown. While the Voidwalker and Succubus and Imp and Fellhunter are cool and have their own unique effects, the Felguard is the de facto play for Demonology, and that really doesn't change in any setting. Thanks for watching, guys. I think that about wraps it up for the 9.2 Demonology guide. And I have to say, I've played Demonology probably in the majority of my testing over the course of PTR, both in Mythic Plus and rating, and I've been pretty impressed. The 2-piece, 4-piece, they just feel good in single target, in AoE, and honestly, the Dreadlash FTS build, the big dogs build, once you acquire your 4-piece, it feels really good to play in Mythic Plus and single target. The build just feels solid basically everywhere. This is sort of what I wanted Demonology to be for a while over the course of Shadowlands. It might have taken the whole expansion to get here, but we've gotten here finally. Now, if you guys have any questions that I might not have answered in this video, or just really any in general, feel free to drop them down below in the comment section, and I will be sure to get back to you. If you've seen any weak auras or profiles or add-ons in this video you'd like to acquire, they are all indeed available to you guys for free on my Twitch. If you want to swing by, hang out, grab them, ask any questions anytime, feel free to do so. And I also want to give one final massive shout out to my patrons. Thank you guys a million times for all support. Really appreciate it. If you're interested in supporting, there should be a link somewhere up here, as well as down in the video description below. With all that being said, while you're down there, if you like the video, be sure to hit the like button, hit the sub button also. Thanks again, dudes, and I'll catch you all again soon on stream. Peace.